You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one on one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical, tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1015. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. Happy 4th of July to those of you here in the United States. And if you're listening after this, hopefully you had a good time at the beach, having the day off with your family or your friends, or doing something to just regroup and enjoy a little bit of summer. Sometimes we get so into our businesses that we forget about taking time away. And taking time to slow down. But that's when our best ideas come. That's when our bodies can bounce back. And I'm really excited because today I'm going to be interviewing my friend, Dr. Kate Hertz. And Dr. Hertz completed her Bachelor's of Arts at Brown, her master's degree in public health at Harvard, and her PhD in clinical psychology at UCLA. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and founder and CEO of the Health Psychology Center of New York, a group practice of expert psychologists providing evidence-based therapies tailored to meet the specific and urgent needs of teens and young adults with chronic medical illness. Dr. Hertz's vision is to ultimately create a global wellness community for mental health practitioners, patients, and family members dedicated to creating a better world for all people with chronic illness. On her new podcast, The Teaspoonie, Dr. Hertz gets personal about her experiences growing up as a lesbian millennial woman with a serious chronic illness, what she's learned from her patients and colleagues as a health psychologist, and how she's built a meaningful life through it all, and how you can do it too. Kate, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Joe, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of ground to cover, and so I shortened my intro a bit there so we could just dive into the interview. And, especially because we've known each other for a bit, we're supporting your podcast. You came to Traverse City, and it's just like, let's just jump into hanging out instead of me doing some big intro.
I love to hear it. Sounds great.
Well, let's start with how'd you get into chronic illness?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It actually happened to me instead of me happening to it. So when I was 9 years old, I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is an inflammatory bowel disease or an autoimmune disease where basically your immune system attacks your colon, also known as your large intestine. And I was really, really sick from age 9 to 14. I tried all kinds of different medicines and none of them worked. And ultimately, I had my major surgery when I was 14, took ninth grade off, had my colon removed and my digestive system all reworked. And so really growing, that's like a big part of my childhood. And my best experiences were whenever I got to connect with slightly older kids or cooler kids or just other kids who also had chronic illness. So then fast forward, I got a lot better after surgery, have continued to struggle, but a lot better. And fast forward, I went to Brown for undergrad and joined this mentoring program that this amazing psychiatrist, Dr. Gary Maslow, was running for college students at Brown who had chronic medical illnesses to basically mentor teenagers in the community at the local hospital in Providence, Hasbro Children's Hospital. That was one of the best experiences of my life. I found so much meaning and purpose and joy. And it was the first time I really felt like, man, this could be my life's work. And I would say I spent then another 10 years figuring out how to make it my life's work. And here we are today. I've been working on it since then.
So what was most helpful about kind of learning and being guided by those professionals to help you shift from, I mean,
Yeah.
imagine as a young person having a chronic illness and feeling, I mean, like I broke my shoulder in sixth grade, and I remember I didn't get to go
Hmm.
to Camp Hayawenta, and I'd done
Oh
it
no.
slam dunking on this adjustable basketball hoop that I was too short to dunk on, and ended up breaking my
Oh
shoulder.
gosh.
And then like someone started this rumor about how I jumped off a ladder to like try to slam dunk, but it was like no, it was an adjustable hoop, and like just feeling this whole class kind of ostracized me for jumping off a ladder and breaking my shoulder, but I
Totally.
didn't jump off a ladder. It was an adjustable
I
basketball hoop.
know.
Like that was sixth
Yeah,
grade,
when
and
you're
that
not
was
there, kids
yeah,
will make fun of you, right?
and that was just a broken shoulder. I can't even imagine having chronic
Man.
illness as a young person. Like, what was that
Yeah.
like for you?
So it was really isolating. I missed a ton of school, and I also was on prednisone, which is a pretty serious steroid and makes you feel hungry all the time, angry all the time, and gives you like moon cheeks or like makes your face look weird. And so I was dealing with a lot as a preteen girl, but then we also uh, just to make it more complicated and fun for everybody to listen about, moved to Brussels, Belgium from New Jersey when I was 12 years old. So then I was in a new place, not speaking the language, going to a new school, and the sickest I'd ever been, like not able to walk up and down campus, really just very, very ill. And so it was very isolating. But I think that what really helped me learn was my connections with other people and building community. And so, in terms of the professional piece, I had an amazing doctor at in London, actually, who I found on a Teens with Crohn's Disease website. I get into all of this on the podcast,
Hmm.
but Dr. Jeremy Sanderson. And he actually, when I was 14 and I was in the hospital to have my first major surgery where they were going to remove my large intestine, he brought in this 16-year-old girl who had had the surgery the year before to talk to me and to tell me how to wear a bikini, even though I was going to have major scars, and to tell me like the cool ways to have an ostomy bag, which I had for a little while. And so, both from Dr. Sanderson and from Jessica and her mom, that's when I started realizing, I really need the community, and that's how I'm going to be okay through this.
Mm. I mean, that must like I have, at the time of this going live, now a 13-year-old and 9-year-old girls, and just
Hmm.
thinking about all the peer stuff that's happening, how important that must have been to
Yeah,
have another peer that you could look to and say, okay, she seems like she's okay, and she's confident in wearing a bikini, and she's confident in this, like how
exactly.
powerful that was, and how smart for that doctor. I think
Oh my
it seems
gosh.
like
Yeah.
at that in that decade, that wasn't always at the forefront of people's minds to think about the emotions that go around chronic illness. Now,
Yeah.
when you were going through your undergrad and your grad school and your PhD, was chronic illness kind of the main focus? Like, I want to do this, or was it something that kind of emerged over time? Because I know that some people, when they go through something, um, I met lots of foster care kids when I was a foster care supervisor, as you do. They were like, I want to become a social worker because they wanted to
Sure.
help the field that they had been in, and other ones were like, screw social workers, I never want to hear that word again.
Yeah.
For you, how did you decide chronic illness was something that you wanted to go into?
So it was absolutely not oh, I definitely want to do this. I work with a lot of teens and young adults who are trying to figure out, like, what do I make of my life? Do I want to lean into this experience, lean out of this experience? It's a really great question. I would say going into college and finishing up high school, I wanted almost nothing to do with chronic illness. And I wanted to be a writer, and I thought maybe I can become an author. And I was doing a lot of creative writing and working on that. So I entered Brown as an English major, took one English class and decided didn't want to do that. Decided that I was just going to take the classes that were most interesting to me. And so got really into ethics of government, which has nothing to do with chronic illness. Ended up majoring in public policy in American institutions and thinking I might here's where it kind of came in. Well, maybe I will get a JD, MPH, and I'll be like a health policy researcher or a wonk or something like that. But when I was a sophomore, I started the Adolescent Leadership Council of Hasbro Children's Hospital, which is their mentoring program. And so by the end of sophomore year, that was so meaningful to me. I was thinking, maybe I will become a doctor. I went and met with the pre-med advisor. At no point was I thinking about psychology. Went and met with the pre-med advisor. They said, you could do this. You would have to take one gap year because I hadn't taken any pre-med classes. And I felt like I was too sick at that time to do the intensive med school process. So I was still really unsure of my body. I had, um, recurring symptoms and was certainly not as sick as I had been as a young teen, but still didn't feel healthy enough to do, residency, staying up all night, all of these things. And so decided, I guess I'm going to just see what could be interesting next. And so I actually did Teach for America and taught high school science in Philadelphia. And through that, I really was like, okay, I'm a science teacher. I do want to keep doing this mentoring of kids with chronic illness. So I started a community health club for my students. We didn't really talk so much about chronic illness, but we talked a lot about like sexual health and other ways to stay healthy as a kid in Philadelphia. But I took a counseling for educators class. I had to get my master's degree in I actually have a master's degree in education also. It's sort of incidental to Teach for America. But I was taking courses at UPenn and I took a counseling for educators class and really got a lot out of it. And I am someone who adopts mentors. So I made that professor my mentor, Professor Peter Kuriloff, another shout out. And he's the first person who told me at the end of my Teach for America experience, um, I said, hey, I'm going to go get an MPH. And I was thinking maybe I'll get a PhD in public health. And that's how I'll be involved in this work and in providing like community resources. And I was like, hey, I'm going to go to Harvard. Thanks for your recommendation. I'm so excited. And he said, well, why are you getting an MPH? You should really be a psychologist. And I had never, ever thought of that before. And so that's when I first started thinking about it. And then I went to Harvard. And in my first year there, it was a 2-year Master's of Public Health program. I cold emailed everybody whose job I thought was cool. Something I got out of Teach for America was I felt like Teach for America was really, really hard. It was physically and emotionally hard and great and all of these things, but it really put me through the paces. I had been also diagnosed with celiac disease right before at the end of my senior year. So adjusting to that whole gluten-free diet. So I had a lot of medical things going on, but I was able to work really hard and long hours. And so I thought, well, I still don't want to be a doctor, but maybe I could do something really hard. So let me go get a PhD and I can be a professor and build programs. So I'm 24. I'm in Boston. I'm cold emailing literally anyone whose job I think is cool. I'm asking them to meet with me. And then I'm saying, hey, here's my whole life story. What do you think I should do with my life? And one by one, all the professors and researchers at Harvard tell me, you're really bright. You can do anything you want, which is really nice and doesn't give me anywhere to go. And basically, I had narrowed it down to, am I going to get a PhD in public health? But I was sort of being shepherded away from that by a lot of people because then you don't have a license to run whatever community programs you could. And a lot of public health workers at that time, that is like 2010. So this is pre-COVID, pre the Affordable Care Act. Public health just didn't offer the range of opportunity for the kind of work I wanted to do. So I was being a little shepherded away from that, although that would be the easiest path. I was thinking about getting a PhD in education because I had the master's in education and then I could go into schools and sort of do the work from there. And I was thinking about psychology, but the catch was I had never studied psychology at all. Not at Brown. I had one course called Counseling for Educators. I hadn't done the traditional research that PhD students in clinical psychology have done. I didn't have papers published. I didn't have any of this background. But then I got lucky. And one of the people who responded to my cold email is Dr. Kate McLaughlin, who is an incredible psychologist and professor. And she was, I think, like 5 or 6 years older than me. I told her my whole life story. I thought she was really cool. She was chewing gum. She had a nose ring. I was like, this person's awesome. Also, I'm a little lesbian. So I'm like, cool, older woman, amazing. And she listens to my life story and she says something different. What should I do with my life? And she says, how old are you? I say, I'm 24. She said, I think you should go for clinical psychology. If you were 30, 35, I might give you a different answer. But yeah, I think you have time to do the application process. You can come and work in my lab and I'll help you get into some classes to get you ready. But I think it's worth the time and input because then you can be the licensed professional on any studies or programs you want to develop, and you don't have to worry about bringing someone else in. So, fast forward from there, 10 years later, I have my PhD in clinical psychology. I spent a couple of years working at Weill Cornell, where I developed an incredible community and was really focused on serving and treating patients with chronic medical illnesses. So, I had gotten a lot of experience with that. Went out on my own in private practice in 2022 and started soon seeing a lot of patients coming in, and recently this year have been hiring and growing. And so it's
Mm.
been really fun to be here in New York doing the work I always wanted to do and finding my way here and being back closer to home on the East Coast.
Please don't DIY your accounting. It's like relying on a self help book instead of getting much needed therapy. There's a reason accountants go through tons of schooling and grueling exams like we do. You shouldn't be expected to know all the things that they studied for years. They're experts and can make the whole quarterly tax situation smooth, and honestly, with some planning, pretty painless. You don't want to be surprised by taxes or have the IRS breathing down your neck. And therapists ask me all the time where to find an accountant. Herd is my go to referral for therapists needing bookkeeping, tax preparation, payroll, and all the financial back office stuff. They even help therapists set up a bank account, form a business entity, and open a retirement plan. They work exclusively with therapists and cost way less than the accountant I worked with for years. The deadline to sign up for 2023 tax services with Herd is December 31st, 2023. You can schedule a free consultation at joinherd.com/Joe. That's joinheard.com/Joe and get your first month totally free with promo code Joe at checkout. Again, that's joinherd.com/Joe. Now, in your practice, when did you start to think about like a podcast and doing things beyond it? Because, in talking to you, I know
Mhm.
you got really full with chronic illness, raised your prices, started hiring people.
Mhm.
When did that go from, I have a thriving practice in New York, which in itself is a feat, growing a group practice, having people pay significant amounts of money for each session with you. When did that go from, I'm just doing this clinical work, not just, I don't like saying
Yeah.
just, I'm doing this clinical work, and you could just grow a mega group practice and that could be amazing for your community. But you chose to go down the route of a podcast and going international talking about chronic illness. How did that happen in your brain?
It's a great question. And I think a lot of it has come through my conversations with you, but also through my conversations with my patients. So, a core feature of my practice is that I run coping with chronic illness groups for young adults in their 20s and 30s, and I keep in touch with them over time. So, I have probably 100 alumni of this group in New York City, and I actually established an alumni advisory board where 15 of them sort of give me feedback about how I can help them more. And I tell them updates about the practice, ask for their advice. How can I grow programming? How can I better serve and reach their community? So through those conversations, I was getting a lot of feedback over time of, you know, I'm really lucky that I found you, that I found this practice, but it was hard to find you and there's nothing else like it. I have patient after patient come to me saying, what really I'm so glad I found you. I've been looking for this. I didn't know it existed. I didn't know there was someone who really specialized in this and who has their own experience. And really what got me from the advisory board perspective was I had two patients sort of close together give me feedback. One who had done the group in 2020. So this is when I was working somewhere else. So this is like a 4 years ago. And she's saying to me, I think that a lot of people, like, there are podcasts about chronic illness. There are people talking about their experience with chronic illness. But what's really special about you is how you build community. And community has always been the most important thing to me. And I've always wanted to have some kind of impact on the community. And I've always wanted to really show other young people and other people with chronic illness that they can have a really big and full and meaningful and varied and exciting and growth oriented life. And so she really pushed me, and the other patients really, it's not that they pushed me, but they told me kind of I could do this. And the other patient who I'm thinking of is an individual patient of mine who has also done the group. And a lot of times when I run these groups, they become my individual patients or tell their friends. And I have a lot of word of mouth business, and I keep in touch with everybody. And this patient has stayed with me, an individual, and he's a guy in his 20s, and he's been doing some like writing assignments for me as part of trauma therapy. And in one of them, he said, I think that when I heard Dr. Hertz tell her chronic illness story in group is the first time I knew I could live a life sick.
Mm.
And that meant so much to me. And I just really want everybody with chronic illness to know, but especially kids and young adults and people who are really struggling to figure out who they are anyway. I don't want them to give up on themselves, and I want them to see that they can live a really good, meaningful, important life, and they already are. And whatever roadblocks they're facing are temporary, and they don't have to do this alone.
Mm. And I think a lot of people have ideas for a podcast or ideas of things that can go beyond their practice or things that they do in their practice that they think the world needs. What were some maybe negative mindsets or things you had to overcome to get to the point that you were ready to launch a podcast?
I think a major negative mindset that I'm still working through is um, definitely like I called it with you on a call, a vulnerability hangover,
Mm-hmm.
because I am sharing a lot of my personal story on the podcast, and that's really vulnerable. It's not something I do writ large. And as a psychologist, I like to have sort of a boundary between myself and my patients and how much they know about my personal life. Usually it's very little. But figuring out how to navigate that piece, I think, is one major roadblock. And I think the second is akin to imposter syndrome, right? Like, I often have the thought, like, who cares? Like, no one's going to care about this. I'm not some celebrity or somebody really important. Like, will anybody even care? Or am I just talking to the ether? And sure, like, my patients like me, but like, that's like 25 people a year versus
Mm.
the bigger impact I'm hoping to have. So I think I am really scared about that. And that's a big mindset challenge for sure.
Mm. What's been easier than you expected in doing the podcast?
I think I actually have so much to say. And it like this the stories come easier. It's not hard for me to sit down and do a 35-minute podcast about all the things that I want people to know. I think that it's exciting. I think it's been definitely way easier. Like, I don't think this ever would have happened if I wasn't working with you and your practice of the practice um, community, because the Done For You podcast, like, I really just have to show up and talk. I think that would have been a
Mm-hmm.
huge barrier. So I'm super grateful for that. It's been much easier. Um, but yeah, I think it's the content has been easy. It's easy to think about people I'd love to speak to and have on to tell about their experiences. So
Mm.
it's been fun.
Now, I was just thinking about how, some people think about chronic illness and they're like, well, I don't have chronic illness. Why should I listen to this podcast? We have all these
Hmm.
therapists that are listening. And I think what's really interesting is in my process of being your consultant with this, just learning that like I'm one of your ideal clients to listen. I have a
Yeah.
history of cancer, I have type 1 diabetes, I've been dealing with this salmonella chronic illness, whatever happened to me in Mexico 2 years ago. And it was like, oh, I wouldn't have labeled myself as a person with chronic illness, but I totally
Yeah.
am. And so even if there's people that maybe don't have chronic illnesses, what do you think the value is for therapists to hear your stories, hear your interviews, learn more about chronic illness for their patients or for themselves?
Yeah. So I think that any therapist, if you do therapy, if you do clinical work for even a year or two, many of us obviously do it for much longer. We're all going to come across somebody who has a serious health concern or somebody that they love who has a serious health concern. And I think that it's really important for anybody in the world, not just therapists, but if you're a person in the world with relationships with other people, I mean, we've seen it really, really highlighted in COVID. Life involves health challenges. It involves major health challenges. For a lot of us, it involves a loved one with cancer, a loved one with type 1 diabetes, or a loved one with Crohn's disease, or an unexplained health concern, chronic pain, or going through, I even consider like pregnancy difficulties and having that make your health tougher, women's health, long COVID. It's just impossible to live a life without exposure to serious health impact on your life through yourself or others. And so I think that as a for therapists out there, I think that I'm hoping to give a big benefit in identifying patients where maybe this is a an area that's really affecting them that we don't know how to talk about or that we don't know what to do about.
Hmm.
And how can we help them through those moments? And for people who love somebody with health concerns, or for you, Joe, like you really are my ideal listener. For you, it's realizing that you are not isolated in your experience, and there are so many other people who are going through similar things who can really connect to you and support you and see you. And so, yeah, I know the chronic illness label can be sort of off putting for people for sure. And that's why I'm calling the podcast the Teaspoony podcast. Spoony is a term that the spoon theory is a theory of chronic illness about how difficult it is to get through the day that I do talk about on the podcast. So people with chronic illness will connect to that. But I want everyone else to connect to the T. I'm going to try to give you all the good tea. Like, what are the crazy health things that can happen? How can you navigate them? How can you live a really good life? How can you connect to other people? What can you relate to that can actually expand your vision of yourself and who you can be and what you can do in the world? I'm really hoping you'll find that here.
Mm, so awesome. Well, the last question I always ask is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that their life and their practice and their importance to their patients can be so much bigger than they can ever imagine, and that just reach out. The community is here for you, and I really believe in you.
Mm. If people want to listen to the podcast, if they want to connect with you more, where should we send them?
You can send them to the teaspoony.com or to healthpsychny.com. That's my podcast and business website. They can also connect with me on Instagram at healthpsychny. And yeah, really would love to connect.
Mm. Thank you so much for being on the Practice podcast today.
Thanks, Joe. It's been really fun to talk to you. And thanks so much for taking the time. Talk to you
Absolutely.
soon.
Bye. Maybe you're like Kate and you're thinking, wow, I do really good work in my practice and I want to launch a podcast. Or I already have a podcast, but I don't want to do the back end support. I don't want to do the show notes anymore. I don't want to do the sound editing. I want to show up like Kate and just be able to make the content that I love and enjoy, and interview people, do solo shows, all of that. Or maybe you just want to dip your toes in for a bit and do 20 episodes, see if it's something that you like, launch it, see if it resonates with people. No matter where you're at, podcastlaunchschool.com is the place for you to start. We have a course called Podcast Launch School where you can learn to do it all yourself. We have monthly podcast supports where if you want to just outsource your podcast that's already launched, you can check that out. Or if you want some help launching a podcast, we have tons of services around that as well. So if you are ready to launch a podcast, Podcast Launch School is the best place to go. Again, that's podcastlaunchschool.com. Also, we could not do the show without our amazing sponsors, and Herd is our sponsor today. And I agree with them when they say, please don't DIY your accounting. I did that for years. The first year I worked with an accountant, they saved me $30,000 in taxes just because I didn't file as an S Corp. There's so many things that you should not be relying on a self-help book. You should be outsourcing it to experts. The reason accountants go through tons of schooling and grueling exams is because they know this stuff. You shouldn't be expected to know all this. If you don't feel like you understand your taxes or the IRS, all that stuff, Herd is who you want to go through. They're my go-to referral for therapists that need bookkeeping, tax prep, payroll, and all that financial back-end stuff. They work exclusively with therapists and cost way less than an accountant. The deadline to sign up for this coming year is you want to make sure you get in before December 31st. You can schedule a free consultation over at joinherd.com/Joe. Again, that's joinheard.com/Joe. And you can get your first month for free with promo code Joe at checkout. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have an amazing day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.